month, we welcome Amanda Baldwin, the president of prestige skincare brand Supergoop. Amanda began her career as an investment banking analyst at Goldman Sachs after graduating from Harvard, and then went on to earn her MBA from the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania. Spent time at in private equity at Apex Partners and L Catterton, and led the brand side at Clinique and Dior. So quite an impressive resume so far. In 2016, Amanda joined the startup world, leading Supergoop, a brand that has been taking the beauty community by storm to help make sunscreen fun, and has become a staple in influencers' skincare routines. So I hope I did not breeze past that too quickly, Amanda. We'd like to welcome you to our thUp in Conversation event.
Thanks for having me. I will definitely clarify, I did not lead at Clinique or Dior. I learned from a lot of incredible people who came before me. That was the beginning of my beauty career. Yes. But anyway, I just want to be fair about that.
All right, well, we won't try to hold that against you. So that academic and professional resume aside, I'd love to start by just sort of asking about your personal background. Where you grew up and where you got some of that inspiration as a child, and some of those key influencers on this path that you've chosen.
Yeah, I do have a belief that you can learn a lot about where you should be in your career if you think back to what you loved to do when you're 8 or 9 years old, before you really knew what you were supposed to do or how much you'd get paid or what was the most prestigious thing on your resume. And what I loved to do was, I'm born and raised in New York City, and I always loved to walk around the streets. And this is before e-commerce. So and look in the store windows and kind of try and understand why something was selling well, why a certain retailer was doing well. I think the first job I ever wanted was to actually be the person in those store windows. So I think that was some version of being a merchant. And I think what the underlying curiosity that I have about brands, about consumers, about why we do and why we buy what we do, it is the same intellectual curiosity that carries through my entire career and has landed me where I am today. So that was probably the beginning of it, was being a real kind of fascinated by brand storytelling. And that has definitely been a thread that's carried through my whole life and still does.
Wow, it's great to know that you can find that connection from when you were so young, and been able to see it kind of manifest itself over your professional career so far too. In college, did you know what sort of concentration you wanted, or did you know exactly kind of that path that you wanted to follow even through university?
I would say yes and no. I think that I definitely knew what I was interested in. Again, going back to those early days on the streets of New York, and this curiosity about, well, why do we do what we do? And there was a concentration at Harvard called social studies, which kind of sounds like second grade history, but was actually a concentration that was about the interdisciplinary kind of intersection of philosophy and politics and economics, and kind of answering that question. Not from necessarily, there's the biological scientific route of answering that question, and then there's the sort of more liberal arts way of answering that question. And I was drawn to that. So it was a concentration you actually had to apply to. So I applied and I got in, and I spent my college years studying consumer theory. And so again, it all, the path that I've been on has certainly had these common threads through them, but don't mistake that for thinking I had it all figured out. But I definitely spent a lot of time looking at the intellectual side of what I do now. I wrote my thesis on the Gap and their heyday and their advertising campaign. I don't know if anybody, I think it's celebrating, because I just had a 25-year college reunion. I think it's like 25 years of their khakis campaign, which was the people dancing around the swing. And it actually had a lot of meaning to it at a very important cultural time. And so I was always interested in tying back like what was happening in branding to what the cultural zeitgeist was at that moment. And I think, again, those things are still incredibly true. I stumbled into what eventually became a career in marketing because I'd been a gymnast growing up. And all of a sudden I was not doing that anymore. And I had all this time on my hands and I was trying to figure out how to spend it. And I was a little bit interested in journalism. And I went to the Harvard Crimson, which was a legitimate printed newspaper at the time. I'll date myself. And the true story is that I, by accident, walked into the wrong meeting. Instead of going to the meeting to learn to write, I went to the meeting to advertise and to learn how the business operations and for some reason it stuck. They had this team that would go around selling advertisements to everything. Pepsi was one of my clients, to the local stores in Harvard Square. And something really clicked for me in that again, I didn't know what marketing was. I was running focus groups and I was developing marketing plans and all these things just because it was interesting to me. And it was sort of a natural language that I fell into. But again, not because I really realized there was a career in it. It was only later in life that I started to connect those dots. And out of the Crimson, I actually ended up on Wall Street. And the reason for that was I started to develop an interest in business, which again, I had no idea what I meant by that, but it was kind of like, if you were interested in that, there was this thing called Wall Street and this place called Goldman Sachs. And it's a good story of kind of how I ended up there, that you could go and learn from, an entirely different angle, right? A super numerically driven angle, right? If I had been really focused on the storytelling, this was the numbers, this is the operations, this was the financial side of the business. And I was like, oh, I should really go learn that, because that's going to be the underpinning, and it's still the underpinning of every decision that I make, is understanding the actual numbers that drive a business. So, but yeah, it was a happy accident.
Yeah, how fortunate, right? Is meant to be. And also I thought that was, what you just mentioned was interesting, because I think, in my mindset, right, people, if you have this path that you want to go into investment banking or private equity, that you need to be really developing those quantitative economics and finance undergraduate. And it was actually sort of this other side of it, the sort of the human side of it, the sociology side of it, that kind of led you ultimately to that path. And so what were some of the other draws for you then to entering, going on to Wall Street, going on to that banking side of things?
I think there was two things. I think it was somewhere, and I don't know exactly why, but somehow I did make a connection to that this was a great place to get a training on the fundamentals of business. The large firms came and they recruited, and I started going to the info sessions and sort of putting two and two together and feeling like I was naturally very based in this sort of more, creative side of the conversation, but I needed to understand the numerical side. So I felt like, and Harvard didn't have any accounting classes or anything that was pre-professional. So I sort of looked at it as this second piece of my education. Mm-hmm. So that was really important to me. It was also a place where, as a young person, you were given just unbelievable amount of responsibility and learning, and you were sitting in the room with CEOs as they were making some of the biggest decisions that they would make in their careers. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of got this incredible bird's eye view of what business was. And I still was figuring out, I didn't, my father's a doctor. I didn't have, I didn't know. And it really turned out to be that. So I spent 2 years, knee deep in Excel models that still are very, very left brain, right brain. So I want to talk to you about the color yellow and why, what it symbolizes. And then I also am going to make a marketing decision by running numbers through a P&L in my head. So it really filled out my sort of experience set and gave me, I think, the underpinnings to understand and really kind of make the connection very early on in my career that creativity was really important, brand was really important, but that a business had all these other elements that really were equally important to making it function. Mm-hmm. And I still think about that when I run our business today. Is usually you see from the outside the marketing and the product, and that's the sexy stuff, but the underpinnings to that, the operations, the financial, the supply chain is equally fascinating and equally important to making the entire thing work.
Right. It's all part of the engine as well. So that runs the business. So I also wanted to ask, so were there some lessons that during that time, especially at Goldman Sachs or in private equity, that you still find impact your decisions today?
Oh gosh, too many to list. I think some of them were, again, super tactical, just learning like this is a P&L, this is a balance sheet, this is cash flow, like
all the
that
toolkit,
stuff was super fundamental. I was on Wall Street in an interesting period. So it was 99 to 2004. So I watched a boom and a bust. And I think living through a cycle like that teaches you kind of how heady things can get in a boom and kind of the dangers of kind of that. And when you think when something doesn't really add up and the numbers don't really make sense, they probably don't. And the other side of being, very early on in my career, watching just the whole thing crash. And watching people have to unwind businesses. And so I think it really helped me think about how do you build something for the long run? How do you make smart long decisions? And also, and I remember probably about a year ago, getting on the phone with my team as we were in the early days of COVID and telling them what the MD who led our group told me. That was, look, if you face something really tough early on in your career, you're gonna have a level of I can get through this that will serve you. And I remember him pulling all the analysts in, and it was just as sort of, you have to remember it was the dot-com boom, bust, and then 9/11, and some really tough stuff, right? And him saying, if you understand how to get through, watch how to get through this, I guarantee you're going to face everything else differently, because you're going to come out the others. And I was able to share that with my team in mid-March of last year, and I think I think it did shape me. So that was probably one of the bigger sort of softer things that came out.
Right, that resilience. Right, how do you find the resilience? Yeah, interesting. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit then about your role at Supergoop. So in 2016 is when you transitioned from working with massive brands like Dior and Clinique to running a much smaller company. I think at the time probably was under 50 people. Did that feel like a natural progression?
Yeah, there's actually a step in between. So when I was at Lauder and LVMH, and then I went back into private equity, the whole sort of pivot for me was a belief of the world shifting into kind of the brands being defined in different ways of kind of the digital revolution, and kind of what were the brands of the future going to look like. And I learned from these big organizations that are still so fundamental to, like, I aspire for Supergoop to be like Clinique or Dior one day. But I was watching all these things happen in the universe and all these new businesses be built and created. And I'm a builder, I'm a creator. I love to get my hands dirty and love to build something and kind of just do things differently. And so that was really attractive to me. So I actually ended up going to a private equity firm, working with their portfolio, and then eventually getting the call about Supergoop, which was my first real chance to try, my hand at leading an organization through an incredible and still ongoing trajectory of growth. So it was a huge shift, but it was, very natural to me. Even in the large companies, I had always been the person who was saying, well, what if we did this differently? Or what if we built this business? And so that had always been my role in the larger organizations. And so my entrepreneurial nature was just kind of totally turned loose. And like I said, I still aspire for us to be like one of those big organizations one day. I think they're really, they're iconic, they're global, they've been around for a long time. And so I often say it's easier to build a house if you've lived in a house. And so I draw on those experiences significantly. So, I think every piece of the puzzle, I think that's sort of what I would say to people like trying to figure out a path is every piece has a purpose. Don't always know it at the time, but you're sort of assembling a set of experiences over time that eventually all come together when you're kind of sitting in my shoes.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm more of like a thinking, especially big decisions is sort of the pros and the cons and lists and things. And I'm really curious, like, what were some of those other intangible factors you weighed in deciding, yeah, yes, this was the right time for you professionally, and this was the right opportunity to transition to the role at Supergoop?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I did have lists. I eventually went on gut. I believe in the gut, because the rational decision was, this was probably not the rational decision for me.
Sure.
And it was not the decision that a lot of people advised me. I had a few different options. So, but there was something in this brand and something in our founder that just spoke to me. So it was, as an investor, I was used to looking at businesses and understanding their numbers and understanding their potential. And I looked at this and I was like, there's no bigger investment that I can make than my own career, my own life. Right. So I really sort of intellectualized it in that way. I also believed and had always dreamed of getting to sit in a CEO seat, of getting to run a business. And I had never done it before. I had been my prior role had been a chief marketing officer. And the fact that Holly and the board were willing to take a chance on me, I knew was not something that I was going to have the shot at every day. And so that was a pretty big thing for me, was just the chance to show what I could do. And then again, it was so much just gut about the brand and just feeling towards Holly and what she was trying to create. And a feeling that we were a really good match for each other. I think that's a whole nother conversation about founders and CEOs and how do you match them well, and the uniqueness and the differences in what we do and how we're wired, and if it's possible to be so completely different and so completely aligned at the same time. Like, that's kind of our story.
Right. It's all the puzzle pieces fitting together at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. So maybe you can tell our audience a little bit more about Supergoop. How the company was built and how it's growing. In particular, if there's kind of challenges and obstacles you faced early on when you transitioned in, I'm sure our audience would love to hear about that.
Yeah. So Supergoop is the first and only lifestyle brand 100% dedicated to SPF protection. Our mission is to change the way the world thinks about sunscreen so that everybody everywhere will be wearing it every single day. So we're really a mission-driven business. And for those who are listening, if you want to hear the early days of Supergoop, because they are extraordinary, Holly was on How I Built This. So I always recommend hearing it from her. But the short version of the story is, she had a friend who was diagnosed with skin cancer at a young age, 29. And she sort of asked the question of, like, why did that happen? She also has a very entrepreneurial family and a best friend who was a dermatologist at the time. And you kind of got this amazing alchemy that produced Supergoop, and a mission to say that, skin cancer will, and we're about May is Melanoma Awareness Month, and we're about to kick off our annual big campaign to sort of spread the word on how critically important this is. 1 in 5 of us will be diagnosed with skin cancer in our lifetimes, and yet it's primarily preventable. And I think there's one thing we've all become more aware of over the last year is our own health and how we protect ourselves in various different ways. And sunscreen is probably one of the most underused things you can do to protect your largest organ, which is your skin. And so, that insight that Holly had very early on was that there wasn't sunscreen. It's just that there was no SPF that anybody actually wanted to wear. That wasn't good for you. It didn't feel good. It wasn't fun. And that's what Supergoop is all about. And I really think we're the only people on the planet who think about sunscreen and SPF every single day. We truly are the experts. So we understand product in a really unique way, but we also understand that we're treating a serious subject with a smile, that you don't actually get people to do things because you scare them or scold them into something. Holly was a teacher and she's a mother. So, there's a lot of psychology in this about making it fun. And I think we've made it fun. We've made it cool. We've made it aspirational. I think the category was basically, tiny and off the radar, and maybe existed sort of at the mass market for a few months a year. And we really shifted that. And it's something that we're so proud of. We're still very early on in our journey. All I see is opportunity in this brand, despite all the incredible things that we've accomplished. I'm very forward thinking always thinking like, okay, that's awesome. And now what are we going to do next? Maybe we could talk about if that's a blessing or a curse, but, that's what we're up to. And we have a wonderful team that is just extraordinary. And each and every one of them are pouring their hearts and souls into this brand and this cause. And, that's who makes it happen every day.
Yeah, I have to say, it really resonated with me as someone who, like, the one skincare routine thing that I do every single day is SPF. So I was like, this was well aligned. Yeah. So you mentioned about being a mission-driven organization and really kind of how that's helped shape the organization. So how are other ways that you see that kind of manifest itself at Supergoop? Is it also in terms of like the team and how people are able to kind of come together, or are there other ways that you see it manifest itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an incredible gift to be given, if you're in my shoes, a mission versus just a bottom line. And, don't get me wrong, we're a business, and actually our business enables the mission, but I think it makes a lot of tough choices a lot more clear. It makes it more obvious where, how to develop product, where we should distribute, how to market, and how to take care of our team. And I think everybody here is very connected to that mission. So I think it unifies us and connects us in a really special way. It's gotten us through a crazy period of time, because I think it's, this has been a wild year and a really challenging one for many people. And if you can get up every day and say, I have to keep going because I've got something bigger that is relying on me, that's a really powerful thing that I think has kind of helped us all navigate everything that the world is going through. So I think it's about the big decisions, the big strategic decisions. It's about the motivation every day. And I think like when you're a brand that effectively sells sunshine, and that's what you're really about. I think about that as much of how we're making sure that the sun shines on the inside as much as it is on the outside.
Nice. That's a great message. Yeah. So I kind of, to take a step back, thinking about, some of those, not just influencers, but advice that you've received that has maybe made a large impact on what you feel like is your success so far. Is there some of those like key pieces of advice that you've received that you say this has really helped shape who I am as a leader?
So many. And it's funny because like as you ask that question, what flashes through my head are the faces of sort of everybody that I've ever had the pleasure of working with, who's worked for me. And it's in every different direction. And I could rattle off 100 names and every person I could say like, okay, this is the thing that they gave me. This is the thing that they gave me. And I've really thought about learning to be a leader as a learning process, that it's not something that I maybe have okay instincts about it that I was born with, maybe, I don't know, but that I work at it, and that I'm like, I don't take it for granted, and that I can always learn from somebody else. So I spent always my career, and I still do, watching and observing other people and seeing how they handle situations. What are the things that they're talking about, so that I can kind of get better at it. To be more specific, I think there were many people along the way. I had my first boss at Clinique had this amazing way to break tension with humor. And she just, she had this amazing way with people. And I remember sort of filing away in my head, like, okay, Amanda, you're a super analytical person. You're always very fact-based, like, but look at the power of emotion. Look at the power of humor, like learn from that. And I had another boss who could face anything that was like the toughest, most sort of contentious negotiation, never, a feather never ruffled. And I was like, the power of calm, and like, never never showing yourself sweat, like that is really important. That's really impactful. And that doesn't take away from being gutsy. And I had some people that I worked with that were, that were just like, could see the white space, that they could sort of see where nobody else. And so again, I could rattle on a million people. I had a boss at Goldman who I made a huge mistake, like beyond a big mistake as an analyst. And he pulled me in his office and he showed me the big mistake he had made. He didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He didn't, I mean, he could have just, and I never will forget that. And I will always treat everybody who makes a mistake in the same way. And so again, I could rattle off a million things like that. And they all are associated with people who are very, dear to me.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's it sounds like a fantastic group of people you've had to help shape, who you've become. And one of the things you mentioned stood out, and it's that it seems, some of it is definitely organic, right? These people that you found, either selected as your bosses or been placed with as managers or colleagues. And then the other side is the other piece that you recognize, this is where I need to work and this is where I need to put in the work. And I was wondering if you have suggestions for our audience or others, how do you go about sort of identifying some of those networks or channels of who do you call and reach out to when you need that advice and you need that support, you need that guidance? Do you have any process for going about doing it, or is it a little bit more, kind of organic?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say is that the best relationships are not the ones that are based on process. Although I will tell you, I was assigned to a mentor when I was at Wharton, who's still a wonderful guy for me. So it can happen that way.
Yeah.
But I think that, a lot, when I think, I think that people that are former bosses are excellent mentors because they know you professionally in a really specific way because they've seen you in action correctly. So I've like, some of, like I said, some of the best people in my life are people that I used to work for, I've kept in touch with, who know me in a unique way and have watched me grow up past the time that I worked with them. So that's been a great, and some are just people that you get introduced to and you kind of know that there's a different connection with them than you maybe have, again, like humans, we are all, there's something that we can get along with everybody, but there's also going to always be those people that you feel uniquely connected to. And I think as I've gotten now older, I'm thinking a lot about not just the people that are more senior than me, but who are the young people that I'm learning from? Who am I? Not just who am I going to mentor? Who am I taking under my wing? How do I make sure that I'm giving back? And I'm learning as much from them, as they may hopefully learn from me. And so I think, trying to think about it in both directions is also important.
Nice. Well, and so on that matter, it's kind of seeing that evolution in your own career and kind of that tide shift where you find yourself, looking more towards people earlier in their career, either mentoring or getting, support from them. Are there some other ways that you really see workplace culture having evolved since you've entered the workforce? That's a really broad question. So
it's a big question.
Yeah.
I think that I'm a Gen Xer, so nobody ever talks about Gen Xers, but I think that, I think the millennials have brought a whole different dynamic to the conversation. I think that, the questions around work-life balance and what does that mean? I think they're much more front and center. I think that there's a lot of really great conversations going on about diversity that you guys are hosting today, and sort of like, what does that mean? I think what's happening is a lot of things are getting talked about that were always there, but we're just sort of not addressed at the scale and the level that they're being addressed now, that I think are really for the better of everybody. So it actually, I think it's the vocalness and it's the outwardness and the focus on the conversations and the belief that we can do better, that you can always, and it's something that, I put as much time and effort and care the most about what's the environment that people are in every day. And I hope that that's emblematic of a shift, and kind of how the broader universe of people in my shoes think is like, I got to think about my people first. The business is a product of the people. And I think that's becoming more commonplace and more at least connected to people that like, that's actually the essence of what it means to be a leader. It's not the output, it's sort of the people that are the input. I think there's more focus on that now. And I think that's really positive.
Yeah, as someone who's in like the HR capacity, that's it's also something I've seen as my career has progressed too. Is I think when I was in university, it was like the personnel department, and then it became like human resources, and now people operations, and seeing that progression too. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to also ask, because obviously this last year, I mean, it's hard to have a business conversation without talking about the impacts that COVID's had on organizations. Where do you see some other real lasting impacts for you as a leader based off of these changes that have happened in the past year?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it is this aspect of humanity. I always believed it. I always knew it was important, but when you're sitting on Zoom and you can see somebody's background, you feel it in a different way. Like you see the life that is there. I think when you see it visually, it changes your perspective about how present it is for them. I think that that's what this year was about, is that none of us are separated from our work life and our home life, or what else is happening in the broader world around us. That doesn't get left at the door. It profoundly impacts who we are when we show up. And as a leader, you have to embrace that you have to understand that you have to recognize that people are going to have good days and bad days. And boy, is this a roller coaster that we're on? And that emotional feeling profoundly affects how people show up at work, their ability to do their job, their joy around their job, and bring it on. Let's embrace that. Let's not put it back and put it back down into a box and try and kind of shove it off to the side. I think that's the biggest change. And I think that will, like I said, I hope that will never change, is because now that it's present, I think we'll all be thinking about each other, not just leaders, but even, as your colleagues, right? You think about the people around you in a different way, because you know them and you know the whole of them in a different way.
Yeah, and I have to kind of connect that to, we had talked earlier this week is in preparation for this call a little bit, the idea of emotional intelligence and EQ, and to me that's where a lot of that connection is too, of just seeing people as more than just the product of their work, but seeing them and understanding them more from an emotional and at a deeper level. And this connection that also women as a group tend to have higher EQs than men. Obviously, that's a broad generalization, but there's science to back that up. And I'm curious if you really leaned on that to sort of help you succeed in traditionally male-dominated roles, investment banking, kind of a C-suite level. Has that been a key piece for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this story, but that when very early on when I was on Wall Street, I realized that I wasn't going to be the fastest at the modeling, that I wasn't going to be the most sort of astute financial whiz, but that I did have a unique knack for understanding people, that I was somebody that could kind of be put in front of anybody, no matter how senior or who they were, and I kind of knew how to handle that, how to navigate that. And I saw that repeat itself again when I joined the world of beauty, which has such a diversity of professional disciplines, right? You've got finance people, ops people, product people, marketers, creators, and that it was something that dawned on me very early on, that to be good at marketing and to rise up the ranks through this kind of beauty universe, I had to be really good at understanding people, and that I think I figured that out. And I think it is it's the thing that I think, like I said, I think the most about, that I try to get better at every day. And I do think that it is something that I've realized that, what you do and your ideas are really important. You can't be in my shoes and not have a strategy, but it's meaningless if you can't communicate it effectively. You can't get people to say okay, I'll buy that. And if you can't, and also get into the sort of, and then let it go, right? You're not doing things every day anymore when you're in my shoes. You're trying to help other people be their best, and that's inherently something that's about people. It's not about a skill that I have. Everybody on my team is a million times better at what they do than I could ever be. So I don't even try. But that is. So, if you want to be in my shoes one day, it's really about something very different than just the analytics and the modeling. And although it was very helpful, I saw that pretty early on in myself.
Nice. And I wanted to also mention, because I have this opinion, I'll speak on behalf of myself, that female CEOs and female leaders still ultimately bear a greater burden to be conscientious about creating family-friendly workplaces, creating inclusive workplaces. And I'm curious if that's been your experience or if you can comment on that.
It's funny. We talked about this a little bit. I don't usually think of myself as a female CEO versus just a CEO. So I've never thought that I have more of an obligation to do anything than just what's the right thing to do. I don't know. Maybe there's a statistic that would say that, but I don't think that is what drives how I operate. Would maybe be how I answer.
And for me, it was more about like my perception of how I think like greater business community perceives that ultimately, when male CEOs are getting interviewed, work-life balance doesn't come up, inclusivity doesn't come up as often, having family-friendly workplace doesn't come up as often. If that's still, it's in this transition where we will stop at some point saying, oh, well, this is a female CEO or a male CEO, and it just becomes part of that's where equality or equity is reached, where there doesn't have to be this distinction, right? And I think what you mentioned earlier was that you've sort of been able to move past that, but has the rest of the business community moved past that, where there's still putting a higher burden or a higher level of emphasis on how are female CEOs addressing this that they wouldn't ask of a male CEO.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it's important for all of us to keep things in perspective that like we've all started really important conversations, but change doesn't happen just because you start a conversation, right? It's an evolution and a change of behavior. So I think we're on a good path. But I sort of never believe that I always say that the things that are worth doing are always hard and take a while. So why I guess would this be any different? So I think what's the best thing that one can do in my shoes is say like, okay, but that's not going to stop me from what I do every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another point you had mentioned a little bit about sort of having these other experts on your team and being able to lean on them for where they're the expert and you recognize you're not. And as a leader, do you identify, is there a process for identifying people that have those different voices and different levels of expertise and encouraging them to share, or sort of being able to give them the same confidence that you have in your background and expertise for them to be able to say, yes, this is where I really want to step up and share my own expertise and share my own voice, even if it's different from the rest of the group?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is about, the people that you hire, right? Culture starts with who you hire. The choices of the people that you make and have, so I always think as I'm hiring about that proverbial table and what are the voices around it. So I think it starts with who you hire, but then it's also the environment that you create around those people. And we have an expression here that's we are teachers and we are students. It's the sort of first of 5 of our values. And that's what we start with. And everybody knows that. And so the philosophy from the beginning is everybody here has something to share. Everybody has something that they are uniquely qualified in. And each and every one of us has a lot to learn from each other. So I think when you set that up as value number 1, it hopefully creates an environment in which everybody has a voice, and everybody knows the places where they're going to have a voice and where they're going to also learn a little bit.
Yeah. So you mentioned about values, and what's been your role in shaping the company's values? Is that something that's been a big part of, since you came into Supergoop, or were they part of the organization when you joined? And how did you come to the values that the company has today?
So when I was probably about 18 months into the job and had made all these fantastic hires and was starting to think, gosh, this team is really starting to gel. I was like, I think I'm supposed to like solidify this in some way. Like, again, I've never done this before, but I started to think like, well, how does the culture come to be? How do values come to be? Like, what does that even mean? So, like a good startup person, I started Googling, and talking to people and investigating and trying to figure out like, what does that actually mean, and researching companies that are known for these things. And I was like, I guess we're going to have to like write this down. And so I started interviewing everybody on the team. I mean, there was like 15 people at the time, 20 people. Why did you come? Why do you stay? And there was these universal threads that went through it that eventually became our value statements, right? And then we have an offsite to talk about it, and this wonderful copywriter who turned it into lines like that I could never come up with. But it was very deliberate. I think that's the thing, that it didn't just happen. It was like everything else, that it was, okay, this is something that we're going to take on just the way that we take on any other project that we do, that it doesn't just show up. I think the beginnings of it did sort of grow naturally, but in order to solidify it, maintain it, hold on to it, use it to guide us, you have to be super deliberate about it and revisit it. We tweaked some stuff in the last year where we felt, okay, this has evolved. We've got to go back. Let's look at these words. Let's make sure they still hold true. And I think we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to understand that just like products evolve, people evolve. Companies evolve, visions. You assume the mission doesn't change a lot, but the values of the company are going to evolve as well, and how you want to communicate them. Our Insticator values are, we start with them from day one, but it's also how we reinforce them too, over our actions, over our processes, over the people we hire. And so I think values have become and continue are going to become a really important part of how companies communicate with their team and with customers and such. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the past. One of my last questions before we jump to questions from the audience, if people want to get theirs queued up, is what are you most looking forward to in the rest of 2021? Personally, professionally? Do you have like a big vacation planned once everyone gets like vaccinated?
Gosh, I'm thinking about planning a big one. It's a little nerve-wracking to do it, but you know what? You got to keep going. So travel, I love. It's definitely been, I'm used to being on an airplane all the time and going around the world. Hope to do that. There's people on our team I've never met in person. And so I think the thing that I'm most looking forward to is having this team back together again, meeting the people I haven't met yet in person, of being able to, we've accomplished so much, and Zoom just does not do it justice to celebrate everything and to celebrate the people and connect with the people. And that is what I'm, really looking forward to most.
Nice. Yeah, we also have added a lot of folks that have never met in person, and so it'll be interesting when we can get everyone, get the gang all together. It'll be exciting. Nice. Well, I wanted to open it up if there's questions that have come through. I haven't seen any in my chat window, but if there's,
I see a couple. There's
oh, you have? Okay.
I don't know, the Q&A, is that what I'm supposed to be looking at? About work-life balance and a book I recommend. Shall I answer those?
Oh, yeah. There we go. Okay. Okay. So yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that up, Amanda. So we did have someone ask a question about handling work-life balance. I'll let you try to answer that.
Yeah. Gosh, I think it's unique
Amanda?
to every person. I don't think there's any one right answer. I believe in life, it's about what's right for you, whether a career choice you make or how you decide to balance everything. So, for me, work-life balance hinges a lot on a lot of help. I have a almost 7-year-old son. He'd be very sad if I said he was 6. He's like, I'm almost 7. And, he has a wonderful nanny who takes him to school, and a wonderful father who is there at night when I'm traveling. And so I don't try and do it on my own. And I think that applies to everything. So my best work-life balance tip is you're not going to balance it on your own. So find the resources and the help that you can rely on, and the support you can rely on. Yeah. So I think that would be my best answer there, and be true to yourself and be true to sort of who you need. And I, it's sometimes really hard for me, but I through the last year, here in my example, like I tried to take and I did, and I have a run or a walk every morning, and just clear my head. And for me, that hour, 30 minutes on my own without being sort of bombarded by whatever it is, child, work, etc., has been keeping me sane. So I think finding a little bit of time for yourself is really important. If you're, sort of in in the shoes that I'm in, where you're kind of trying to juggle a family and a work as well.
Right. Trying to maintain that balance. It's not easy. So it takes work like everything else, right?
Yeah.
And so another question that someone had posed was if there is any business book that you recommend, and what's been especially if there's one that's been really recent.
So many. I think the one that I would have to shout out is the one that sort of inspired me to take this job, which is a book called Blue Ocean Strategy, and it's a story about kind of like how to find the white space and kind of go to places that, and that's sort of what I would call a strategy type of book that I really love. I'm always reading something new, so that would probably be the first one. And then I do read a lot of books on leadership. I'm trying to think of like one. I'm trying to think of my most recent one. I read that Bob Iger, the former CEO of Disney's book, and I really loved that. I really aligned with his philosophy and the choices that he had made as a leader. So I would recommend that one as well.
Oh. Well, we're always taking suggestions for our team
I love to hear everyone else's recommendations. So.
Yeah, we're reading Only the Paranoid Survive right now. So if you've read that one. Yeah. Are there any other questions from our audience? All right, we have some in the chat window. Okay. One of the other questions that came in is, how has the skincare as self-care trend impacted your company's approach to sun care?
Gosh, we always believe that it's not skincare or self-care without SPF. So I think the world has caught up with us, with all due respect, versus the reverse. I think that we were kind of ahead of our times, and that we really believed in that. And that was Holly's insight very, very early on. And I think the thing that we have driven that trend. So I'll take a little bit of credit for us on that one.
Ahead of the curve there, for sure. And so this next one, we know you're not a dermatologist, but we did have a question. What sunscreen tip would you recommend for the oily skin type folks of the world?
Well, I'll give two answers to that. I would highly recommend Unseen Sunscreen. It's oil-free, and it's kind of the easiest universal SKU in our portfolio that everybody seems to love. So it's always the one that I recommend first. If you do want a more mattifying effect, we have a product called Matte Screen, which is going to kind of give more of a mattifying finish. Unseen is a little bit more what we call neutral or velvety. But we have a great product finder on our website. So, and you can answer a bunch of questions or chat with our we call them sunshine specialists who will answer any questions that you have and probably do a much better job. Customize it.
Nice. What a great plug. Yeah, we'll have to send some e-traffic your way. So another question came in. So thanks for everyone who's been sending those in. Is talking more about, where do you look to for inspiration, and who inspires you?
Gosh, like I said, so many people, and the list is really long. What I would say, one place that I go for a lot of inspiration is, I love art and design and anything sort of related to the aesthetic world. So for me, just to kind of get out of the zone and show up in an art gallery or a museum is, back to the whole traveling thing. It was always something I would try and carve out a little bit of time when I was on the other side of the world. So that's a big source of inspiration for me.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite museum?
I would say in New York, it's the Met. Definitely that's, I don't know, I've been going there since I was a kid. And one of my favorites it's a small museum in Madrid called the Thyssen, which kind of shows the history of art. It's almost like walking through an art history textbook, or Western art, I should say. And it's just got kind of one of everything. You see it all on its own. It's like just so fascinating. So definitely my favorite.
Wow. All right. Well, let's give this the sort of travel, putting us into a
wanderlust
mindset. Yes, exactly. Well, so on that note about inspiration, I wanted to thank you, Amanda, for joining us today and sharing with us some of your inspiration as well. to thank you to the audience who joined in, took some time out of their day to listen in. And we hope you found today's conversation inspiring, helpful, and motivating. I also wanted to plug, we did officially launch our Insticator thUp website. You can learn all about it at insticatorpathup.com. There you can revisit our previous in-conversation chats, sign up to stay informed of upcoming events, and a replay of today's conversation is going to be posted there by the end of this week. So share with your friends and colleagues who couldn't join us today to check it out. We also invite everyone to join us on our next In Conversation event, Thursday, May 20th, same time, not same place, although we'll probably still be all over Zoom. We're going to be joined by Loveleen Sidhu, the CEO and co-founder of Bank Mobile. So registration is already open now at insticatorpathup.com. We hope to see everyone there. And with that, I just want to give a virtual round of applause for Amanda Baldwin, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Wish everyone well.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.